So the bandsaw has a motor down underneath here, and it has a pulley that comes up and turns the back side of this wheel here. And around the wheel is this blade. So the bandsaw goes all the way around here. You can't get inside. You can't do inside cuts, meaning you can't just the inside of the board. It has to be an outside cut. So what we're going to use it for here is we're going to take off the majority of this triangle here, of that angle. The majority of it, because we don't want to sand the whole thing on the disc sander. If we do that, we'll get through about 5 students, and then I'll have to replace the disc. And it's not a cheap proposition to do that all year long. So we're going to try and take the majority off the bandsaw. The bandsaw is never an end product type thing. Bandsaws are for getting close to a line, and then you're going back and you're sanding with a spindle sander, you're sanding with a disc sander, you can't sand it by hand, you're filing it, but it doesn't give us finished enough cut for it to be a final project, to be a final step for us. So some things to know about this for safety is that here's the line that we're cutting with here. Your hands never go in that line, they always go to the outsides of it. We have guides that prevent the blade from turning as we're cutting, and we have, on the back side here, we have a bearing that we can't push the blade back as we're putting a pressure, pushing our block into it. So I'm just going to do a minor adjustment here because it feels like it's pretty tight in that back side there. I want that to spin a little bit more loosely. So I'll adjust that. Seems pretty good. I'll lock that. I'll lock this. The other thing to show you is on the back side here, there's a handle. That handle has a set screw that goes against this rod here. So if I loosen that, this whole assembly is going to drop to the table. So before you adjust this, inspect to make sure that the blade's stopped. Put your hands behind it so that even if it was running, your hands wouldn't be touching that blade, and you're going to loosen this. If we keep dropping, if we allow it to just drop on this tabletop every time we did it, this would not last very long. So we're trying to prevent doing that. So I want to bring it so it's just above the thickness of the material that I want to cut here, and I'm going to lock it in position. Then I want to go ahead and I sort of cut off this side here. What I don't want to do is cut my line. I don't want to touch my line with the blade. I want to stay to the outside and just take off 80% of that triangle that we're looking at there. So for this cut here, I turn it on. My hands are going to be to the side here. And I'm going to cut it off that all my lines are still visible. I'll do the same thing for this one. This time I'll have my hands on the right side. So that I have my angles kind of close. Now, why do I feel like this is a better step than the other way? When I set this down, I'm setting it on a flat edge, meaning that why did I cut the ends rather than doing the edges first? If I had cut the edges, this board would not sit flat, so you see on an 1/8 of an inch there. So I would have to have a square on the back side of this. I'm going to grab another cabinet. Sometimes for something like this, it's easier to use one of the triangles that I have that really is designated for clamp up, to keep things square and clamp up. But I would have to hold that here, because this would ensure that, if I'm holding it against that, it would ensure that the piece that's sitting here is at a 90-degree angle. If I do it before I cut those angles on the edges, it wants to sit that way anyway, so I don't have to worry about using one of those. I don't want students to be opening this up, to be looking inside here. At the end of the period, if we unplug it, we can vacuum out the bandsaw then. But otherwise, please leave all those guards in place. And you do want to, if I was cutting this board this dimension, I would loosen this up and I would bring my guard down. So now about 1/8 of an inch over the thickness of the wood. Why? Because now my finger can't get in there. I can't touch that blade. So it's just added precaution for safety. Okay. Start-stop switches. I have a waste area here for the piece when you're done cutting them. Just put them down in here, and that's the bandsaw. Okay, we generally use this for contoured cuts, generally for like when we have to make turns. But on something like this, it's a really useful tool to have for small cuts. that just have to be not real accurate, just taking off some of that material. Okay? So we're not to the line. What are we going to use to get to the line? Let's walk over to the disc sander. So this is a disc sander, and one of the first things I want you to notice about it, if you look at the disc sander here, when I turn it on, it turns in a counterclockwise direction. So if I were to use the right-hand side of this, A, all the sawdust that's taking off the board here would be going right up into my face. And B, as this turns, it wants to lift the board up as it's turning, which potentially could have the board fly across the room, which we don't want that to happen either. You always want to be sanding when using a disc sander on the half of the disc that has a downward turn. Number one, it keeps your board on the table. Number two, it takes the sawdust that we're cutting and throws it down into the vacuum chute that goes up. Okay? The bandsaw didn't have a vacuum attached to it. This sander does. So let me show you what that is. Stay here, just take a look around there. Over in the corner of the room, there's a green and red switch. That is the vacuum. Green turns it on. When I turn this on, my belt sander turns on also. So if someone's waiting for you, you shouldn't be standing here because this bracelet is going to be turning at the same time. Again, I don't have to use a square because I have 3/4 of an inch thickness that's square and wants to sit correctly. When you use the disc sander, you don't want to steer stationary on it. You always move the board as you're cutting. If you don't, you're going to get burns on the end. Not what you're looking for here. So now you can see a little bit of my line there, and a little of my line there. That looks good. Now I'm going to flip it to the other end. Line, line, line. Right? So we're getting there. What still has to be done is my angles here, here, and my holes. So I'm going to cut my holes first. So let's beat over on the drill press.